before I go off on this tangent, I want to say that if my research and understanding of reality is too dark or low vibrational for you, or if you prefer a sugar-coated, comfortable delusion over cold, hard realizations, then you don't have to follow me. You don't have to pretend to be my friend, and you know that. The truth is that I'm only getting started. My mission is to expose the lies, expose the illusions, expose your shadow, and teach those who are willing to face themselves how to integrate that shadow and become whole in order to make the most out of life while you're here and face oblivion without flinching. There's enough of the love and light fairies plaguing this platform, but I have to warn you and them not to ignore the darkness that not only exists in every one of us, but waits for us in the end. Ignoring this darkness can lead to a psychological imbalance that will never allow you to achieve your full potential. And with that being said, I imagine this might be the last time any of you hear from me, or if after this you want to get to know each other or understand each other a little better, or you want to express your grievances / disagreements, then I invite every single one of you to have a one-on-one conversation with me. It doesn't have to be for content. It can be a personal one-on-one between two people who value the expression and sharing of ideas. So this is either my farewell to you or an olive branch. An equalizer, perhaps, because never in a million years would I consider myself to be better than any of you because, well, I am you and you are me. We are born of the same meaninglessness, and I guess if there was something that separated me from you, it would be that. At least I have the courage to admit that life has no objective meaning or purpose, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. Knowing that I have no objective meaning or purpose allows me the possibility to achieve or be anything that I subjectively perceive myself to be in this life. And what I subjectively perceive myself to be in this life is individuated. And through the integration of the beauty and horrors of life, I am at peace and free to strive toward my own meaning and purpose. So, with all of that being said, I think that you should know my stance is not one of judgment or condemnation of those who have children. This is simply my worldview and philosophy rooted in determinism and existentialism. So it seems that I have struck a nerve with a lot of my so-called friends, and I guess that I should start by saying, if any of you have ever read my work, then the comment I made would not have angered you so much. But none of you read my work, do you? None of you seem to care that for damn near 25 years that some of you have known me for 25 years, I have been constantly digging and digging, researching and searching, always questioning, dissecting life to its core, and dedicating my life to understanding reality for what it is at a fundamental level. And now, all of a sudden, you come around talking like you know who I am, like I haven't been in close contact with most of you for at least a decade now. If you had cared or read my work lately, then this wouldn't be so shocking to you, because I've gone to great lengths to explain my philosophy in depth over the past few years. And nobody reads it, and that's fine. I understand. Nobody reads anymore. You all want stimulating videos. Most people prefer videos that are within their 30-second attention span, and I get it. That is why I'm recording this as a video and not writing it, because, let's be real, many of you do not have the mental capacity to read for more than 1 minute. But you know what? I do. I read every single day, thousands of hours, while you binge Netflix and TikTok, play video games, or raise kids. I take copious amounts of notes, diving as deep as possible into the crevices of the human experience. And with that being said, I understand. I understand the reaction that you all had to what I said, because, to be honest, it was predictable. And it's not just because many of you are mothers and fathers, but it's much deeper than that. And I think many of you would agree with that. It's much deeper. You might say it's something you just can't explain, but you're wrong. It can be explained. And I know many of you will say something like, you don't know, or you can't speak on it because you don't have kids yourself. And to be honest, that's ridiculous. I've been around plenty of women during pregnancy, and I have known them deeply in the process. I have known them in the days, months, years after giving birth. I've observed their immense love and their immense fear. And yeah, I agree. It can be very beautiful. It can be horrifyingly tragic as well. Now, you still might be able to shrug that off, like, people who have had kids. It's deeper and different when you actually have them yourself. And that's fair, but let me explain why that is not entirely true. I'm a student. And I'm not just a student at a university where I study psychology and neuroscience, but I'm a student of life. Archaeology, anthropology, history, mythology, philosophy, psychology, neuroscience, biology, astronomy, physics, quantum mechanics, world religions, and the occult. That doesn't even cover half of it. But there are things I have studied obsessively for at least 25 years now. And those are all broad categorizations of the subtopics I have dug into and dissected in these fields of research for decades now. And with that said, existentialist and absurdist philosophies put forth by thinkers like Arthur Schopenhauer, Jean-Paul Sartre, Soren Kierkegaard, Friedrich Nietzsche, Albert Camus, and Emile Cioran have been guiding forces behind the evolution of my worldview, as well as existential psychology like the works of Rollo May, Viktor Frankl, and Irvin Yalom, Carl Jung's depth psychology, as well as neuroscience, and understanding of hard determinism put forth by Robert Sapolsky have also helped shape my worldview as of late. These have been life-changing fields of study for me, as they have helped me to overcome a decades-long battle with crippling anxiety and depression without the use of medication. So my as Jessica put it, life's obsession with truth has filled my life with immense meaning and purpose beyond anything I have ever known to be possible growing up. And I am currently working on academic papers that expand on Carl Jung's theories in depth psychology, and I am also working on my own interdisciplinary research that might give a theory on everything that many people can rally around. So, with as much as I have observed and studied about life and the human condition, I think it's safe to say that I understand deeply what connects parents to their children. The bond between parents and their children is driven by powerful neurochemical processes that are mostly centered around oxytocin and dopamine. Oxytocin is often referred to as the bonding hormone. It's released during childbirth, breastfeeding, and physical contact, all, with the infant, and it creates the feeling of attachment and protective behavior that you feel. Dopamine is associated with reward and pleasure. It reinforces parental caregiving behaviors by creating a neurological reward circuit that makes caring for the child feel emotionally satisfying. And this neurochemical flush creates a feedback loop where the parent's brain is chemically rewarded for attending to the infant's needs. So yeah, I understand it. If it all effectively hardwires attachment through biological mechanisms that override rational deliberation about the costs and burdens of parenting. So why does all of this happen in the first place? It's because there is an underlying will to life, as Schopenhauer would put it. And in my work, I call this the drive towards differentiation, but they're the same thing. So Arthur Schopenhauer's concept of the will to life is central to his pessimistic philosophy. And according to Schopenhauer, the will to live is a blind, unconscious force that drives all living beings toward survival. Not just that, but toward reproduction and ultimately the continuation of life. This will is not rational or purposeful, it just is. And it is an irrational striving that underlies all existence. I believe this will to live, this drive towards differentiation, is consciousness itself, and it permeates everything in the universe through all dimensions of time and space. This idea is akin to philosophical theories of panpsychism, and panpsychism is the philosophical view that consciousness is a fundamental and ubiquitous feature of reality. And rather than consciousness being a property that emerges only in complex biological organisms like humans or animals, panpsychism proposes that some form of consciousness or experiential quality exists at all levels of existence, from subatomic particles to complex living systems like you and me. So this doesn't mean an electron has thoughts or feelings like a human, but more like there is some primitive form of experience or proto-consciousness inherent in all matter. Contemporary philosophers like David Chalmers believe that consciousness is not something that mysteriously appears at a certain threshold of complexity, but rather something that has been present all along, combining and integrating into more complex forms of awareness. Doing that as matter organizes into more sophisticated structures, like you and me. This is a conclusion that many spiritual traditions came to believe long before modern science. Spiritual traditions like Hindus and Buddhists, to many Christians who claim it is God that is in everything, and many Christians today believe that God is the highest form of consciousness, and he/she drives all creation. Again, what I call the drive towards differentiation. This is also a belief that many New Age seekers hold. The ones who say the universe is one, man. It's all connected. Those types. And I agree, but I don't think the light of creation, the drive towards differentiation, or the will to live is as benevolent as most people think it is. For Schopenhauer and I, this will manifest not just in humans, but in every atom, every quark, every particle, and so on and so forth. Its hunger produces insatiable desires, cravings, and needs that can never be fully satisfied. Even when the will achieves what we desire, new desires emerge, and it creates an endless cycle of wanting that ultimately leads to suffering. The will to live compels organisms to reproduce, ensuring the perpetuation of the species, but this occurs without any conscious consideration of whether life is actually worth living or not. So what Schopenhauer argued is that once we recognize the will to live for what it is, a blind, meaningless force, then we begin to transcend it through asceticism, compassion, and the denial of the will itself. And with that being said, we have to recognize two very real concepts that are linked to this will to live or drive towards differentiation, this consciousness. And I think we should start with the ego, a word that a lot of you are throwing around all willy-nilly but seem to have no idea what you're even talking about. And so, let's see, Chloe had this to say. I would argue the ego you're talking about parents having is larger for people who want their bloodline ended with them. And I don't know where you adopted your idea of the ego, but let me explain it this way. The ego represents the part of the will to live, the drive towards differentiation, the aspect of consciousness that has crystallized into a sense of a separate self. It is the part of this drive, this hunger that has become attached to its own existence, to its own being. The ego is not separate from this will to live, it is the will to live. And more importantly, the part of it that has become self-aware, and in that awareness has developed an intense attachment to continuing its existence. This attachment manifests as the ego's relentless pursuit of self-preservation, self-expansion, and the perpetuation of its identity. The ego selfishly strives for more life, more experiences, more validation, more security. It's always reaching, always grasping, always fearing its own end. This intense attachment to life, this relentless pursuit of self-preservation, is precisely why so many religions have adopted the fantasy of an afterlife. It's a direct response to the ego's inherent inability to accept death's finality. It's a coping mechanism for the underlying terror of non-existence. I would suggest you read The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker for more information on this subject if you don't think that I'm educated enough to express myself in this belief or why these things happen. But I would beg to differ, so I will continue. Humans, deeply attached to the very act of living, find solace in the promise of an eternal place where they can continue to exist in some capacity, even after their physical demise. This really isn't even a spiritual belief, it's just a psychological necessity born of the ego's willingness to lie to itself in order to propagate itself. It has to believe in what Ernest Becker called an immortality project. An immortality project designed to alleviate the terrifying anxiety that arises from contemplating one's own mortality. The causal chain is clear. Our deep attachment to living creates a desperate demand for its continuation beyond death. Religions then supply this demand with fantasies like heaven, offering the reassurance of a post-mortem existence. And the stakes are high. They involve identity-level comfort versus the acceptance of our harsh reality. These beliefs persist not necessarily due to metaphysical proof, but because they serve a very crucial psychological utility. And that utility is that they make us feel better about the inevitable. They guarantee that we never have to die, and we can still enjoy the life we are so attached to, even beyond the grave. It's the ultimate expression of the ego's desperate grasp for more life and more existence, even when faced with its ultimate limit, that being death, transforming existential dread into a hopeful narrative of eternal continuation. It does this despite the inevitable suffering that accompanies existence. So, while you are all throwing around that word, the idea that I am being egotistical despite not having any real grasp on what the ego actually is, or how it functions in the relation to the will to live, you're ironically demonstrating the very attachment to existence that defines the ego itself. You are the one attached to life and its continuation. It is your ego that is shining in this moment, not mine. You think a future that allows for more suffering is worth it as long as life continues. Not me. I don't think that. If anything, I am egoless in the idea that I want to stamp out the ego and end its cycle of suffering. My bad. Forgive me. I think that the entire point that all of you have missed is that I want suffering to end. Period. And even if there are some good things that come with life, the joy I feel when seeing the sunrise, the taste of chocolate, or the feeling of love, it doesn't equal, oh, it's okay that a child is being eaten and compared to the taste of cream cheese. What a lot of you are doing is using your privileged anecdotal experience to justify having kids, but not thinking about the child who will be born into poverty or war or disability. You're not considering the future they'll inherit, the environmental collapse, resource scarcity, and endless cycles of exploitation, the young men who will be used as cannon fodder in nonsensical geopolitical power struggles. You're only thinking about your own desire for meaning, your own need to experience love, your own biological imperative being fulfilled. That's the ego speaking, void of compassion for the potential suffering of a being brought into this world without their consent. I would say, let's walk through a children's hospital, or let's walk through Gaza Strip for that matter, and tell a kid who's had both of his legs blown off and lost both of his parents in the same explosion, tell him to his face, your suffering is good. It builds character. And, oh, guess what? My kid is an honor student in America who eats 3 meals a day and enjoys video games and warm hugs. Therefore, suffering is justified. Have a nice day. Or tell that same kid what Isaiah said. Tell that kid, you're missing the point of life. It's not about safety. It is experience. And suffering doesn't deprive us of joy. It amplifies it. Do you not understand how tone deaf that is? Even still, I mean, let's say that you provide a beautiful life for your children. How many children were provided warm and cozy, loving homes who died a long, drawn-out, agonizing death in a car accident? No child, and this was my point all along, that no child is guaranteed safety from a fate such as this. And I hope that neither of you nor any of your children have to go through anything like this, but I personally will not gamble with that happening to a living being. And that's all I'm fucking saying. I guess that makes me a piece of shit. But I have friends whose kids are not having a good time in this world at all. And every day for them is a living hell. They don't want to get out of bed. They don't want to engage in the world. They are tired of doctor's appointments and medication. They'd rather just not do this shit at all. And you might have friends with kids like this as well, but maybe you turn a blind eye to it because it's not your kids. Thing is, I don't turn a blind eye to them. And you all speak about the love and joy your kids get to experience and the love and joy of being alive. And I'm glad you and them share that experience. That is great for all of you, but what about the person clocking into their job for another 60 to 70-hour work week, sitting in a cubicle doing something they absolutely hate, that brings no meaning and fulfills no purpose in their life? You know, they go home, light a joint to numb how miserable they are, and they try to enjoy something that gives them a bit of dopamine for 20 to 30 minutes, like Netflix or video games, before passing out just to go back to their slave wage job at 5 in the morning. This is even worse if they have kids they are trying to provide for. And while it's great that this parent is doing everything they can to provide for their kids, consider the possible damage done to kids raised on iPads without present parents, or parents that are alcoholics or drug addicts just to get through. Consider the damage that millions of kids are being subjected to today in this, what Danielle admitted was a dystopian horror. Skyrocketing anxiety, depression, suicide rates, not only young children, but also in their parents. So, yes, it's great that you aren't dealing with this. and let's hope you never have to, but the trajectory of these statistics are not looking good. And you know what I find funny is that I know that there are some of you who identify with the sort of persona that says, you got to kill the ego, man. You've got to kill the ego. And what I'm gathering from every single one of you is that you are still attached to the life that itself is the ego's attachment. It's attachment to life that I explained earlier. The ego is your attachments to life, love, light, legacy, the future. And the core truth of Buddhism states that attachment leads to suffering, which I would argue also results in selfishness because of your attachment to procreation, legacy, and the future. You are being selfish as you are not considering the suffering of someone who wasn't able to consent to it. You have the nerve to say that my philosophy is egotistical when in fact it is very much ego-less, as I am denying the insatiable drive of the ego to continue despite what comes with it, that being suffering. From where I'm sitting, this is a far more philanthropic stance than any of you are taking. But with that being said, I think that we should take a look at some of your guys' arguments. My incredibly intelligent fiance had this to say: in life, suffering is guaranteed, while love, light, and beauty are not. If all life ceased to exist, there would only be peace in nothingness. Advocating for prolonging life is advocating for prolonging suffering. And then Brittany, not quite understanding the point, said, the flaw in your argument is that a person who never exists can't benefit from being protected from suffering. There's no subject there to experience that improvement. You're comparing real lives with experiences to a hypothetical state where no one exists at all, and those aren't comparable things. And here's the point you missed, Brittany. Let me present you with David Benatar's asymmetry argument. Let's see. David Benatar is the man that I paraphrased in my post that exposed the fuck out of everybody's inability to sit with and accept harsh realities, as well as their lack of emotional intelligence. He's a leading proponent of anti-natalism, and he presents what he calls the asymmetry between pleasure and pain in his book, Better Never to Have Been. Benatar's argument presents a fundamental asymmetry in how we should evaluate the presence and absence of pain and pleasure for potential people. I think it is safe to say that all level-headed people would agree that the presence of pain is bad and the presence of pleasure is good, right? Sure, what one considers good or bad is subjective, but from mine and probably most level-headed people's point of view, if you say no and you are okay with people experiencing agony, then you might need to rethink the moral high ground you're assuming over me. Now, with that fundamental being laid out, this next point is crucial. The absence of pain is good, isn't it? Even if there is nobody to enjoy that absence, it is good that pain is avoided. While the absence of pleasure is not bad unless there is somebody who is deprived of that pleasure. So let's break this down even more. If a person exists, they are likely to experience both pleasure and pain. As we established, the pain is bad and the pleasure is good. But if a person never exists, they will experience neither pleasure nor pain. So the absence of pain is good, even though there's no one to benefit from it. But the absence of pleasure is not bad because there's no one being deprived of it. So what this asymmetry reveals is that bringing someone into existence always creates the possibility for real harm, while the prevention of pleasure by not bringing someone into existence creates no actual deprivation, since there is no one who exists to be deprived. The non-existent cannot be deprived of the pleasures of life. It's simple as that. But once they're brought into existence, that person can and undoubtedly will suffer. Benatar's asymmetry argument demonstrates that procreation is always a harm to the person created, even in the best case scenario, because you're guaranteeing suffering to varying degrees, while the absence of pleasure for the non-existence is not a harm at all. This perfectly complements Schopenhauer's will to live and my own concept of the drive towards differentiation. The will drives us to reproduce without consideration for this asymmetry, without rational deliberation about whether creating a new center of suffering is even justified. Your ego, your attachment to life, and its continuation blinds you to this fundamental asymmetry. You focus on the pleasures your children might experience while conveniently ignoring that preventing those pleasures by not procreating creates no actual deprivation, whereas the suffering you guarantee them is a real and inevitable harm. So let's continue from here. Gina, you ended your comment with the extremely loose understanding of the ego that I talked about previously. You said true parenthood requires shedding the ego. And that's funny because you spent 70% of the post talking about yourself and what you get out of bringing a child into this world, not what the child gets out of being brought into this world. You started the post with the words hopefully, and personally I think that is unethical and egotistical and selfish to gamble in that way. And if you still want to talk about the ego and the shadow as well, I mean, I think that's a good place to go. Do the hippies in the crowd still want to talk about ego dissolution and shadow integration? Because believe me, I've done my share. And I find it very strange that so many of you jump to the conclusion that my philosophy is the philosophy of someone who is hurt or needs a hug or needs to go outside and get some sun or needs to step away from the computer screen, when none of you know anything about me anymore. A lot of you knew me when I was at my worst. A lot of you knew me when I was in great pain and needed a hug. A lot of you knew me at that time, but you didn't know the depth of the pain that I was hiding behind every mask that Jennifer mentioned when she told Elena, I've seen every phase of Jesse. I lived through his Jewish prophet phase, his Rastafarian phase, his digital art designer phase, his rapper phase, his poet phase and now his psychological philosopher phase. First of all, I don't remember being a Jewish prophet. That's weird. I mean, I am a Jew by blood, and I immersed myself in deep study and reflection of the Hebrew God and the supposed Messiah. That period of my life is still greatly influential to me and my understanding of reality today, but I was no Jewish prophet. Second, my Rastafarian phase. What the fuck are you talking about? Because I smoked weed and I had dreadlocks and listened to reggae, I had a Rastafarian phase. I never, ever in my life believed that Haile Selassie was the second coming of Christ. I studied Rastafarian culture and beliefs deeply, of course, as I've done with so many world religions and cultures, but who the fuck ever said I was a Rastafarian? You did. Just like you said I was a Jewish prophet and that I was an enlightened being. Third, you said my digital art designer phase. Newsflash, Jennifer, my career is literally that of a digital art designer to this day. More specifically, I'm a marketing manager and creative director, creating digital art every single day. As for my rapper phase, yeah, that was an imbalanced persona, a mask for sure, without a doubt. Next, you said my poet phase, which I would argue I'm still very much a poet. That never stopped, and I would say that I was always a philosophical psychologist or a psychological philosopher, as you said. I would say that is my true, authentic self, my dharma, or my higher self, if you will. Something that I should have never ignored or repressed. But you see, a lot of you knew me back then, but didn't know I was suffering from severe panic attacks, anxiety, and depression every single day. So much so that every single day I felt like I was going to die during these endless panic attacks. It seriously was getting to a point where if they didn't stop, I was considering whether or not life was worth living at all. See, a lot of you knew me in those days, but you had no idea how much I was suffering. Yes, those were the days when I was undeniably attached to my identity and who I thought myself to be. And I've attached myself to all those personas or masks throughout my life because I was deathly afraid of being rejected, invalidated, or being unworthy as the authentic me. Things like Jennifer said, she said, can we all just agree that this post made us lose a little more respect for this enlightened being? That was the type of thing that kept my shadow suppressed. It kept me from being my authentic self. Things like that made me adopt the personas that I adopted. And I wanted so desperately to be liked. I wanted so desperately to be accepted and validated and respected. So much so that I had to deny who I authentically was in order to be someone you all would like. I'm sure a lot of you have that. Some of you are still doing this to this very day. So let me break down the shadow for all of you. Since none of you actually know what the ego is, I imagine you don't really understand what the shadow is either. You see, when we're young, we begin to develop a persona and a shadow in response to what the world rewards and what it punishes. The persona is the version of us that earns approval. It's the mask we learn to wear so we can belong, so that we can feel safe and be seen as a good person or a respectable person. But every time we shape ourselves to fit the expectations of those around us, something else gets pushed down. The anger was called disrespectful, or the sensitivity that was called weakness, or that curiosity was called weird. The needs that felt like too much were suppressed. That rejected material does not disappear. It becomes the shadow. It's the discarded parts of our being that carry shame, fear, and the most overlooked part of what we have the capacity to be, that raw power within us. Over time, the persona becomes a prison because we confuse the mask with who we truly are. Shadow work, therefore, is the process of facing what we've buried, reclaiming what was split off, and becoming whole again. So, what happened to me after repressing my trauma, my shadow, and hiding my authentic self behind multiple masks? Well, for years I lived many lies. I sat here watching people act like they knew me, like they understood the decades of struggle I had been going through. And they knew of me, sure, but how many of us truly reveal ourselves to each other? How often do we adopt that persona, that mask, just to gain acceptance, to feel worthy or validated? That was my life for far too long. I was only putting on a mask, adopting several different personas that I thought people would like, hoping that they would like me. The problem with this charade is that the constant performance is suppressing who you truly are. Because you're performing, you're suppressing who you are authentically, and it forms the shadow. I did that my entire life, and it created an overwhelming psychological imbalance within me. I could never truly be authentic, never truly be who I really am, because I had to put on a front. I obsessed over people liking me, respecting me, and validating me. I lived under the servitude of needing to be accepted. And what was the cost? It was the decade-long severe anxiety and crippling panic attacks. Every single day I was afraid of death, convinced that I needed to be in a hospital. It was the most frightening stage of my life, and it was a direct consequence of that psychological imbalance. And then something shifted. I began to integrate all of these things because I was studying them. I knew there was something wrong. I didn't know what, but I needed to study. So I began to learn to dissect life and understand what causes this imbalance. It took a long time, and I did it without medication, without professional help. It was just me guiding myself through the most difficult and uncomfortable time of my life. So uncomfortable, in fact, that there were nights I spent with a pistol in my mouth. But I pushed through it. I pushed through and I kept looking for answers, and I came to the understanding that when I choose to integrate the shadow, to become who I always felt myself to be without hiding, that's what truly is great about integrating the shadow, about becoming your true and authentic self. You no longer depend on people to accept you or validate you or respect you. You don't need that. You don't depend on that anymore because you are the one who validates you. That's something that I wish I knew all along, but you don't need anybody else to do that for you. You don't need anyone to like you or respect you. You only need to do that for yourself. And as long as you are achieving what you've set out to achieve based on who you know yourself to be at your core, then you will thrive. And it's funny, after discovering all of this and getting to where I am in my life now, as soon as I did this, as soon as I healed all my trauma and got rid of the psychological imbalance, my so-called friends reject me. They say they were losing respect for me because of my ideas, because of the way I think, or because of my authentic self, because I was now revealing not only who I truly am, but what the world truly is, without sugarcoating anything to be accepted. They called me hurt, damaged, and angry, but this is so far from the truth. Yes, I was damaged in the past, but that damage does not define me now, and I don't need a hug. I get plenty of hugs. Isaiah, I would take a hug from you, dude. I would love that, but I'm not living as a hurt person anymore. I'm living as a healed person. I can see the world for what it is, and I can see myself for who I truly am, and not pretending to be anybody else. And as I've done that, I have never been happier, never been more at peace in my life. I'm not hiding from anything or anyone anymore, especially not from pain, tragedy, or suffering that life brings inevitably. I accept all of it. I'm at peace with meaninglessness, assigning my own meaning to myself and fulfilling it. I'm living a great life, happier, healthier, wealthier, more successful than ever, and experiencing the fullest love with my fiance. Life has never been better, so yeah, I find it hilarious. I find it really funny now that I have integrated my shadow and am living authentically as my individuated self without a mask. You still don't accept me, respect me, or find me worthy. And the difference now is that I no longer depend on your acceptance or your validation or your respect, or any of you finding me worthy at all. I am free from those chains. I am free to achieve everything I have the power to achieve in this life without catering to any of you. I am aligned with who I was always meant to be all along, the psychological philosopher that Jennifer mentioned last but not least. I am aligned with my meaning, my purpose, and I am fulfilled. I am an academic, a psychologist, a philosopher, a researcher, a writer, a challenger, an adversary, a destroyer of illusions, a son, a brother, a fiance to the most beautiful and amazing woman in the world. And I will research, write, and reveal my findings, whether you accept them or not. I don't need you to. You don't need to. Even if I think the challenges I present offer worthwhile perspectives to consider. The truth is that I am happier than I have ever been. I am healthier than I have ever been. I am wealthier than I have ever been, and more successful than I have ever been. And now that I have stopped denying the harsh realities of life, I can finally enjoy its beauty, which I do obsessively. I am in South Padre, on South Padre Island at the moment. We just celebrated our birthdays together. Last week I was in Florida on Cocoa Beach, and 2 weeks before that I was in Las Vegas for the 50th time in my life. A couple months before that, I asked the love of my life to marry me 10,000 feet in the sky on top of Mount Sandia in New Mexico. She said yes, and I couldn't be happier. Never been so happy in my life. So I would appreciate it if you shut the fuck up with the "you must be hurt" thing. It's obvious that you have no idea what you're talking about. We get out, we hike often. We are in the gym 4 to 5 days out of the week. We are excelling in our academic careers, and we are incredibly, undeniably happy and in love. And it's fucking amazing. I never thought I would get to experience something like this. We have an indescribable amount of love and a connection with one another that I can guarantee most people never feel with their partner. And it's really sad. We see what a lot of you go through. But there's no love like a child's love that we are missing in life, because the love we share with each other literally fills us with speechless appreciation for life every time we look into each other's eyes, every single day. So, that's fine. You live for your kids, I live for her, and she lives for me. That's enough love. And while there is immense beauty, joy, love, and light in my life, I am not naive enough to think it is eternal. That's what makes the moment so precious, isn't it? Because while I'm not suffering in this very moment, I might be crushed by a smoldering hot engine today or tomorrow on my way home from South Padre Island. And there's probably 3, maybe 4 of you who will even show up to my funeral. And I don't blame any of the rest of you for not coming, but even after my funeral, the days, weeks, months, and years will go by where I become more and more of a fleeting memory. 150 years from now, nobody will care about who I was or what joy and love I felt in my life. Billions of years from now, what remains of my body will have been absorbed into a dying star, and that star will eventually die as well. Its energy will disperse through the galaxy, and as more stars join its fate, eventually the universe will reach that maximum state of entropy. And all of the stars will have exhausted their fuel and gone dark. Those black holes, the final monuments to cosmic violence, will evaporate through Hawking radiation over an incomprehensible amount of time. The last particles will drift apart, separated by distances so vast that they will never interact ever again. Temperature will approach absolute zero, and no energy will flow, no change will occur, no structure will remain, and the universe will be a cold, dark, infinite expanse of nothing. There will be no consciousness to observe it. There will be no life to experience, and there will be no suffering. There will be no pain, no longing, no disappointment, no loss. There will only be silence. And in that final state, the universe will have achieved what no living being ever could: complete freedom from the will, complete cessation of striving, complete absence of suffering. So this is the inevitable destination of everything. And it's important to know that because every joy you've ever experienced, every moment of love, every triumph, all roads lead to this point, to the void itself. Because the universe tends towards non-existence, toward entropy, toward the end of all difference and differentiation. The ego, consciousness, love, warmth, and light will not survive the dissolution into the cold, bitter darkness that you all can't stand my acceptance of. And so we are merely temporary fluctuations in an objectively meaningless universe, marching toward nothingness. And when the last light fades, when the final particle decays, there will be no one left to mourn. There will be no one left to remember, and most importantly, no one left to suffer. And with that being said, what future is it that you're fighting so hard to stay alive for? Brandon said that that's not protecting a life, that's giving up on the future. And what future? A future where more children suffer just because some have a shot at privilege? Larry said that if the mere possibility of suffering made life not worth living, humanity would have ended a very long time ago. And to that I say, what is wrong with life ending a long time ago? When it guarantees suffering, and no suffering is better than any suffering. I don't understand why it's better that we go on into the future. Kate said, children are literally the future, and creating them is directly linked to our evolution as a species. Might as well embrace it. Do your part and populate the planet with a few free thinkers. So you're saying that we should populate the world with a few free thinkers who also get to suffer in a life they never asked to be a part of? You see, I don't know what any of you are getting at with these arguments. Why is the future something we should even want? I think it's selfish because we have the privilege of the comfort we feel in this moment. What grand destiny awaits that justifies perpetuating this cycle of consciousness, suffering, and inevitable death? The future you speak of is nothing more than the same pattern of more beings born into a temporary existence, experiencing fleeting pleasures between valleys of pain. Some only know pain, and then they dissolve back into the nothingness from which they came. So a future with humans is not salvation. It's just more of the same cosmic joke over and over again, ad infinitum, until entropy claims its final victory. So why is a future for humans good? Because some people get to enjoy fleeting moments of love and joy between their pain and suffering, while others only know suffering. See what I'm saying? What is the harm in walking hand in hand into extinction? I mean, I get it. This, of course, will never happen. The ego is far too powerful. Consciousness will hold on until all of the energy in the universe is exhausted and returns to a cold, unconscious equilibrium. But just because the majority will never choose to stop adding to this suffering in this cosmic prison, why do you have to Why do you have to? If you exist with such a heightened state of knowledge and awareness, a being who is consciously aware, like you are, guaranteeing more suffering by reproducing, I just don't understand. The math is simple. Stop creating life and you put an end to suffering. That, like I said, is the most philanthropic stance you can take. You can say, but life is going to go on in some way before the heat death of the universe, and that is true, but it doesn't mean you have to take part in it as someone who is consciously aware. It makes sense, but you won't accept because your fear of death and your attachment to life. The ego fears returning to nothing and is attached to life despite its consequences of suffering. You see, here's the problem with our species and why we are so tragic, why we are such a tragic evolutionary mishap, as Wessel Zapffe would say. We have achieved such heights of conscious awareness, and we continue despite suffering. You know, Paul made his silly comments about animals and extinction, but while we're also animals, what separates us from the animals is that we have surpassed them by leaps and bounds when it comes to our level of conscious awareness. We still act on instinct, yes, but we can conceive of the fact that we are prolonging our species despite the harm that comes with it. And animals can't think that far. Therefore, I would claim they are innocents in all of this. We aren't. We can conceive of these things and we still choose to add more suffering and think it's okay just because there is some joy sometimes. Do you not see how selfish that is? We are the only species cursed with the awareness of our own objective meaningless, yet we cling to existence anyway. We are the cosmic accident that became conscious enough to see the prison bars, but too afraid to stop building new cells. And that, my friend, is the tragedy of human existence. So I will leave you with this. You can dismiss what I'm saying. You can call it nihilism, pessimism, or whatever label makes you comfortable enough to ignore it. But if you've made it this far, you can't unthink it. And maybe that's all I ever wanted. Maybe all I ever wanted was to plant a seed of awareness that grows in the quiet moments when you're alone with your thoughts. When the distractions fade and you're left staring at the same abyss that I refuse to ignore. So this is where I'll leave it. Whether this is goodbye or the beginning of a deeper conversation, I leave that up to you.